Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome, Professor Metcalf. Thank you for talking to The Print. We are here to discuss your new book, The Indo-Pacific Empire. And the Indo-Pacific is clearly, even in the pandemic situation, the flavor in geopolitics, as you have rightly mentioned in your book, that this is now resonating with almost all governments in the world. So to start off, the first thing that sort of intrigued me in your book, that you mentioned that Indo-Pacific is not really a wordplay. This is basically something that is real and something that has future, sort of implications also. So if you just give us a few, an idea of that, what is Indo-Pacific?
Look, thank you for the opportunity to do this interview with The Print. And to begin with, look, I think it's a really key point to understand that this is not about just playing with words. I mean, my new book, which we've mentioned, Indo-Pacific Empire, that looks at the strategic rivalry in our region. It looks at the way in which our region has been understood throughout history, through maps, but through the behaviour of states, through economic behaviour. And I guess the key argument of the book is that over the past 20 to 30 years, there's been this intense phase of reconnection of our region, bringing together the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, bringing together South Asia and East Asia, and indeed Southeast Asia and the broader region, including Australia. And that this is really about the trade, the sea lanes, the energy routes, and the journey, if you like, of strategic influence of naval power across this much wider map. It's particularly about the interests, the influence and the assertiveness of China. So the Indo-Pacific in a way is not so much or not only about India, though India is an important part of the story.
If I can ask you, and since we are in this pandemic situation now and already talks of a post-COVID world, that's being discussed and there's a discourse going on, you said in your book that today an Indo-Pacific fever seems to have taken hold in governments from Washington to Jakarta, Delhi to Tokyo, Canberra to Paris. But the only government where it has, I would say not really recognized as such was except Beijing. Why is that? And if you can, describe that portion of it, how China views it. And then, of course, I'll come to India and how India sort of perceives it.
So it's kind of ironic in a way that the country that is most politically or rhetorically allergic to this idea of the Indo-Pacific, or at least to the term, is China. And so we've seen in recent years Japan, the United States, India, Australia, Indonesia, France, a whole range of countries adopting this terminology as a kind of a code for their solidarity with one another, in response partly to the expansion of Chinese interest and influence into the Indian Ocean. At the same time, we've had the Chinese leadership reject many things, of course, most recently rejecting the idea of an independent global inquiry into the origins of the pandemic. But at a more rhetorical level, 2 years ago, the Chinese foreign minister openly rejecting the Indo-Pacific as a term or as an idea. The irony being that it's China's own behaviour, particularly through the maritime Silk Road, the maritime dimension of the Belt and Road, the expansion of infrastructure, of influence, of investment, but also of strategic presence. Just think about the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean, for example. It's that Chinese behaviour that has been the driving force for the reconnection, the reunifying of the Indo-Pacific. This Chinese quest for some kind of dominance will continue. So there's going to be an even greater incentive, I think, for the middle players like India and Australia to band together to manage this new situation where China is disruptive, where America perhaps is dysfunctional, as we're seeing. Too soon to tell, but that's, I guess, my sense of what this post-COVID world will look like for our interests.
So overall, in a post-COVID world, do you think that the Indo-Pacific, where will it fit in the sense, what position do you think it should take? Will it be more anti-China is what some people are viewing it? If you can throw some light on that.
Sure. Well, I think the basic idea of solidarity and respect for the interests of nations of all sizes in a connected region and a connected world, those are the core principles of the Indo-Pacific idea, and I think they will be just as relevant, if not more relevant, in a post-COVID world, even if nations like ours are struggling with the internal challenges from the pandemic, struggling with the economic recovery. But unfortunately, because China has chosen not to use this crisis as a kind of opportunity for a rebalancing of its own foreign policy towards engagement in a kind of charm offensive, but instead we're seeing continued assertiveness, I think it's inevitable pretty much that we'll see these renewed efforts from other countries to hold China to account, try to moderate its behaviour and band together. At the same time, the Indo-Pacific is obviously not the only game in town. The anti-pandemic response, the counter-pandemic response, is a global dynamic. Of course it is. And in fact, as with the Indo-Pacific idea, this should, in theory, involve China very heavily. Of course, we should be seeking to engage China on these issues and to give China every opportunity to play a significant role in reassuring other countries, in transparency. I think giving India greater legitimacy and a greater role in the regional order. But at the same time, the Indo-Pacific idea does not have to be about excluding China. Of course, in some ways, China is a quintessentially Indo-Pacific power through its behaviour, its Belt and Road, its expansion into the region. But ultimately, it's a choice for China as to whether this is a more exclusive arrangement or a more inclusive arrangement. And I think just to interestingly capture that, and I'll just share with you one of the images from the book. As I said, I make a lot of use of maps in the book, and it's fascinating to see, as the inside back cover demonstrates, a Chinese map which places the Indian Ocean at the centre of a new Chinese worldview because of the connectivity, because of the resources that await China there. So it's not as if China is blind to the reality that it's now operating in a two-ocean region. It's just that at this stage, I think Chinese policy is very unilateral.
Within this setup, how do you think India can maintain this fine balancing act in its foreign policy, keeping Indo-Pacific in mind going forward?
So look, I think India's been really quite pivotal in the trend towards redefining the region as the Indo-Pacific, the two-ocean region, the maritime region based around the sea lanes. I know there are many balancing acts for Indian diplomacy, and of course India also has to balance the maritime against the continental, Indo-Pacific against perhaps a more Eurasian conception. But I think it's very impressive the way that India, particularly under the current External Affairs Minister, formerly the Foreign Secretary, of course, and indeed under Prime Minister Modi, I think he's been, very, ahead of his time on this issue. India has recognised that it can't ignore a maritime destiny, that global connectivity really is centred on the Indian Ocean in so many ways. And yes, we're seeing some interruptions to that trade at the moment, but I think it's still very difficult to see any kind of global connectivity without the Indian Ocean there. And of course, India itself is a rising power with maritime strength as well as, if you like, challenges. So the Indian role, I think, is in some ways pivotal, along with the other, middle players, as I call them in the book. India is quite, I think, rightly unapologetic, quite proud of its own Indo-Pacific place in the world. And this, as I argue in the book, is a long Indian legacy that's been somehow, if you like, revived. And it's interesting, in my view, that India has been getting closer to some other partners, such as Japan and Australia, precisely because we share those same Indo-Pacific principles.
Do you really see a confrontation happening with China, Russia on one side and other powers on another side when it comes to, really institutionalizing something like an Indo-Pacific, keeping in mind larger umbrella of trilateral dialogue, the Quad, and now the Quad Plus? So it's an intricate maze that's getting created.
I think we've got to look through the rhetoric and look at the reality. Yes, there is a Russia-China partnership. Russia, in my view, is not fully invested in the Indo-Pacific, certainly not diplomatically, but even as a security actor, I think Russia is going to support China where that's a low-risk strategy. I don't anticipate a situation where Russia is fully going to get on board as some kind of ally of China. The broader argument about whether we're headed for regional confrontation or crisis, my book makes the argument that on a spectrum of relations between countries in the region, we are at a difficult phase, and a realistic objective is to maintain at the moment coexistence and a kind of competitive coexistence, the kind of relationship I see already between India and China. Coexistence is enough for the time being. I do think that the idea that we're headed to two very simple blocks where China and Russia are on one side, maybe the rest of us are on another, I think is a gross oversimplification. And in fact, it's almost an idea that's deliberately cultivated to discourage democracies in the region from building common cause with one another. So I think there's a lot our countries, for example, Australia and India, can still do together. We can put multipolarity to work through our own behaviour. I think the more that we can reduce the risks of confrontation and conflict.
And what do you exactly mean when you talk about minilateralism?
So one of the striking, developments in the region in the past 20 years that my book, recounts, because, of course, a lot of my book is really a history of the past 20 to 30 years, which is handy because the world is changing so quickly that I think people are going to be more interested in reading a distillation of history rather than just a description of the present day. And one of those trends is that we've seen a very healthy tendency in this diverse region, the Indo-Pacific, for countries no longer to mediate all of their diplomacy through just one channel. We're now seeing a web of minilaterals, that is, small groups of countries based on their shared interests, their shared capabilities and their readiness to work with one another, building that much stronger, bolstering web of architecture, of diplomacy and indeed of security capability in the region. It makes for a more stable regional order. I think it means that we've got kind of an insurance policy against a reduced American role in the region. And I think it also helps to send a signal to China that there are coalitions that will form as China becomes more assertive. And so, yes, the quadrilateral dialogue, Australia, India, Japan, US is the most famous of these minilaterals. And as I said earlier, one of the minilaterals to watch now is the way in which, in response to the COVID crisis, we find small groups of countries forming on the basis of interests, capabilities, a degree of trust as well, islands of trust, to cope with the situation. So the 4 Quad countries now, plus Vietnam, plus South Korea and New Zealand, are holding regular discussions about sharing notes on their COVID response and preparing for a post-COVID world. And that's a demonstration that the Quad is here to stay as a kind of foundation of new diplomatic arrangements. And I guess at the heart of that still, even then, was the South China Sea, where the 9-dash line, of course, today is just as mythical as the sea monsters were then. So I might leave it with you at that point.
But thank you for talking to The Print, Professor Metcalfe. I wish you all the best for the book and stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and the same to you and to viewers in India.
Thank you.
Thank you.